Morning, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you, wherever part of the world you are in. And Colin, it's great to see you again. I've been seeing you more than once a month, but every time it feels like it's coming back home. We are getting together and we're having a good time. So this, can you believe it? This is the 9th episode of Scaling APAC, right? We had this idea last year. And we put together some plans on paper and we say, come on, let's just get it done. And now we're on our 9th episode.
And we both look like we've aged about 5 years.
Yeah, so it's really been a great journey. And we have put together this show because we really want to put and invite people who have got real life experience in scaling APAC and put their life experience so that someone like you who's watching this out there can shortcut and learn shortcuts and get things out a lot faster and more effectively. Yeah, so you are a great influencer. You've pushed me. Sometimes I feel that it's tough, but because we are working together like this, it's faster to get things out, right? So maybe I'd like to invite you to do a quick intro for some of the people who may still not know you, although lots of people already know who you are, and introduce a little bit about Scalar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I'll actually just take it on two sides. So a little bit about myself and Scalar, and then I guess I wanted to add a little bit about why we wanted to do the show, Scaling in APAC. So I'm one of the co-founders of Scalar. So I'm an entrepreneur. I've got a couple of businesses, including we will shortly have a Scalar Ventures Fund, which I'm very excited about. Got to pay for my international school fees somehow, so you got to do what you got to do. But my core business is we work with technology companies to help them expand. We do everything from we build their advisory board, we can help to hire, recruit their teams, and we do their go-to-market. And 9 countries that we operate in, we've worked with 48 unicorns, 500 tech startups, so that's the end of that sales pitch. But the reason why I wanted to touch a little bit about Asia Pacific is I had a very interesting conversation with a US-based client, and they asked me the question, why APAC? And the answer is salted egg. But the second answer is, for a lot of people actually aren't familiar that Asia Pacific is 2/3 of the world's population. Actually, Asia Pacific also has greater purchasing power than the rest of the planet combined. It's the fastest growing middle class on the planet. It's got 6 of the world's top 20 richest countries. And also, another fun fact that a lot of people don't know is currently Asia Pacific has 30% of the world's family offices. In the next 5 to 7 years, it's actually going to be 50% of the world's family offices. Given that generational wealth is passed down here, it's a lot more. That's very much the culture. And what I also found quite interesting is 30% of the world's family offices are in Asia. 20% is based in Singapore. So I didn't realize that 1/5 of the world's family offices are actually located in Singapore. It's a very, very interesting region. It's extremely diverse, it's extremely fragmented, and that's why people often find it difficult to penetrate APAC. It's just once you do nail APAC, it's an incredible region, some of the biggest deal sizes on the planet. So I guess we wanted to do this show to talk to people about look, I love the Asia Pacific region, I think it's fascinating, but it's helping companies that are looking at doing market entry here in terms of how do we do it, how do we sell? How do we make money? Where do we go for hawker center food, etc., etc. So, what about yourself? Tell us a little bit about MediaShock.
Right. So MediaShock, I'm one of the co-founders of MediaShock. We are in the content and media space, and particularly, and how we click so well is I have a geeky side of myself, right? So we really want to help companies in the tech space communicate those complex ideas and eventually help them sell better by having a more effective and engaging message. Because I've seen lots of wonderful products, and whenever I speak with some of them, they speak to me in alien language, and that's fine for me. But if they're really wanting to clock sales and to win over the hearts of the VCs they're speaking with, they need to dumb down in a language that their audience care about. And especially in APAC, when you need to do this across multiple languages and culture, that's one of the things that we are very passionate about, right? So that's that little bit about MediaShock. So if you are in the business of wanting to grow your business in APAC, or you already have current operations, we could be a potential content agency for you to help bridge and get whatever wonderful plans you have on strategy into action by communicating them really well.
I would actually just word it, if you are a B2B company and field marketing is a part of your go-to-market, which is how you do your go-to-market for a B2B company, call MediaShock. You're going to need to do webinars, you're going to need to do video content, both in terms of case studies, testimonials, but also to be able to simplify and break down what your product is. It's very common in companies that are post-Series B to have basically an explainer video. In short, that's the collateral, that's the enablement that you're going to need for expansion into APAC. That's what MediaShock helps companies to do. See how differently that's worded?
Yeah. So last episode, I think we did some work on expansion in APAC and some go-to-market strategies. This week, I'm really excited to have a very, very important and esteemed guest. And I was surprised on how the final topic that we came out and agreed with. He went back to basics. He says, come, let's how to get your company from 0 to 1 using simple and understandable frameworks. And I kind of really respected him for it. He said, oh, let's go slow. Let's not care about growing out loud. Let's go from 0 to 1. And I respect this guy a lot for that, because a lot of times when you want to go fast, you want to grow big, it's about identify what you're currently doing and going slow in that manner. I mean, he doesn't go slow, but I respect him for going back to the fundamentals. And from the fundamentals, that's when you examine how you are before you can really scale fast.
I'm a massive fan of our following guest. Thomas Jeng is his name, as you will see. So I've known Thomas for probably about 2 years now. So I met him actually before. I had moved to Singapore and it was in his capacity at Aspire. We've spoken on panel together something like 4 times. I'll be honest, to me he's one of the most impressive executives in Asia Pacific in the tech ecosystem. Partly because of the work that he did when he was in San Francisco. So he's worked with VCs and helping them to scale. He's helped to scale VCs. That's unique. In 10 different countries across the world, he's helped Aspire, which is one of the most iconic companies, not just in Singapore or Southeast Asia, or actually Asia Pacific. He's helped to effectively build them. He's also one of the nicest people that I've ever met. Incredible panel speaker, and he's also got a fantastic nickname given to me, which is Thomas the Bank Engine, because he does work for they call themselves a digital wallet, but that's okay, we won't get into that. But I think everyone's got to get a ton of value from hearing Thomas speak. He's, as mentioned, one of the most interesting men that I've ever met. And he's a very busy guy. He travels all the time. He's got 3 kids. He must have a very, very patient wife. But yeah, I'm hoping that you guys get as much value from hearing him as we get from being friends with him.
Yeah, and he wears so many other hats beyond what you just said. He's also a venture partner with Headline Asia. And I will ask him probably one of the most important questions I'm curious about is how he manages his time.
Yeah.
Right. So I can't wait to hear from Thomas on the secret framework he's going to share with us so that you can get from 0 to 1 and in fact to your tens of millions and hundreds of millions. Right. So without further ado, let's dive in and welcome Thomas Jeng.
Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Jeng, venture partner at Headline Asia, and I'm pleased to be bringing you 5 frameworks to help guide your growth. To introduce myself, I've spent a fair bit of time across different industries. I've been a go-to-market leader 3 times across professional services, edtech, and now fintech as well, leading sales, marketing, partnerships, all sorts of different functions within this broad category of bringing products to market. I'm also now a venture investor, as I mentioned, with Headline Asia, which is a VC firm investing globally. I'm part of the Asia arm, which focuses on Japan, Taiwan, as well as Southeast Asia. In addition to these roles, I'm also frequently a mentor and advisor to startup founders throughout the region. I also had the experience of founding a digital talent platform myself. And so the act of going 0 to 1 and trying to create something from nothing is one that's familiar to me and has a strong place in my heart. So for our first framework, what I want to talk about is the 6 fits. Oftentimes, in the startup ecosystem, we talk about product market fit. And it's very true that this is, in some ways, a holy grail for companies that are going 0 to 1. After all, if you don't have a product that the market wants, you have no business whatsoever. What we talk less about is about the other fits that are required to actually scale your business, especially once you've gone from 0 to 1 on product market fit. First, credit where credit is due. This framework is inspired by Brian Balfour's 4 Fits framework. And Brian Balfour, of course, is the former head of growth, or the former VP of growth at HubSpot, and now the founder and CEO of Reforge. I really admire the work, and I recommend it to anyone who's looking at product management and growth generally. I've increased the number of fits to talk about here by 2 as part of my own experience. The first thing that I always start with is market. Who is, in fact, the customer? What is their profile? And what are their needs? What is the context that they sit in terms of the competitive environment and the policy and regulatory context, especially in industries like education, fintech, and so on? Once we have a strong understanding of the customer and what they need, we can look at the product. In other words, what is the actual offering? What is the solution we're bringing to those customers? And we want to make sure that there is consistency between their needs, the pain points that they face, and the key features, the painkillers, and what Brian has called the gain creators on the product side. In other words, what are we actually doing for the customer that solves their needs in a way that's different than the other offerings and solutions that are already on the market? And we'll talk more about how to make sure you have a coherent value proposition later, but this in some ways is the core and the foundation of everything else. If you do not have the fit between market and product, you do not have a business at all. It's not really possible to have a consistently scaling business without a product that you're actually bringing to a market that exists. As you introduce product, you of course need to look at your distribution channels. And we can look at channels more broadly. Really, this is any way you're trying to reach the customer. And every channel could be for anything from email to WhatsApp, to TV, to a billboard. It's really any way we can have an interaction with the customer. And it could even be channels or means that are outside of our direct control influence, like word of mouth. And for every channel, we want to be looking at things like interaction quality. How are we actually interacting with the customer? What is the information we're conveying to each other? What is the sense of expertise? What is the sense of quality that we are able to bring to the customer through these interactions? And fourth, of course, is monetization. It wouldn't be a business if we weren't trying to make money. At the end of the day, we do need to look at how we're charging customers, how we're pricing, and what sort of terms we're offering. And each of these things, of course, each of these 4 elements, again, could be a whole deep dive by itself. What we should really be keeping in mind is that each of these elements needs to fit with the others. Your distribution channel should also be bringing your product to market in the best light possible. Some channels are just a better fit for some types of products. For example, if you're selling an embedded finance product that's highly reliant on APIs, it's unlikely in most circumstances that something like a billboard will be successful. You essentially need to set up something more like enterprise sales, where you have deep, repeated, and very robust discussions with the customer as they're trying to figure out how to implement and how to use your product effectively. This is what I mean by interaction quality, where you actually need to make sure you are meeting the customer where they are and helping them make progress towards their end objectives through a combination of the channel as well as product. And of course, your monetization needs to fit with the market. You can't be pricing yourself out of the market. You can't be pricing yourself too low in the market. And the way you price and the way you charge needs to be consistent with the qualities of the product. And of course, your distribution channels themselves need to be consistent with your monetization when it comes to cost as well. You can't be doing enterprise sales for a $5 popsicle on the street. It's just not going to happen. You will not make enough money to offset the cost of your sales force, for instance. And so you should only deploy this in very specific situations. Do keep in mind as we go forward, as we talk about the other frameworks today, that you need to have a fit and concordance between each of these different frameworks. So some of you will be familiar with the elements in this framework, which is a modified version of the value proposition canvas, which you can find on the internet. And I've modified it slightly in my own coaching and my own advisory work to make it a bit more digestible for founders who are looking for a simple and straightforward way to communicate their value to the market. But there's also another way to really express the market and product fit. As you can see, the 5 boxes on the left, the customer profile, the jobs to be done, the current alternatives, the pain points and gain points are essentially what's represented by the current market. What the customer wants, who they are, as well as what they're currently using. Inevitably, unless they already have a perfect solution, whatever they're using will give rise to pain points as well as gain points. Pain points being the things that are causing them pain, of course, that are leading to friction, that are making it difficult to do their job and accomplish what they've set out to do. Gain points being the gaps in capabilities that the customer might desire, but they are not getting in their current set of offerings. These are things that will make them stronger. Oftentimes, the customer or the user will be more motivated by solving their pain points than their relative gain points. Once we have a grasp of who the customer is, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're using, and the various pain points and gain points that are associated, we can start to construct in our mind what would be the major selling points of our own solution. What are the pain points that we can match to our painkillers? And what are the gain points that we can match to the vitamins or the gain creators that we might be offering to the market? The combination of those painkillers and vitamins in the context of the customer's needs is what gives rise to distinctive value. For instance, in my work in edtech previously, we were working with trainers, we were working with consultants who were trying to create very premium experiences. And without naming any names, the alternatives on the market for a learning management system or for a content delivery system tended to be very video-based. It was essentially akin to a Coursera, where you would record a video, you'd have the audience or the students watch the video, then answer a set of quizzes. And that was fine if you're essentially trying to deliver a set of lectures and you're trying to democratize learning. It's a very easy thing to do. But in the case of our customers, they were trying to create a very premium experience. They themselves were schooled in the latest pedagogical methods and wanted to express a more interactive experience. And in their context, this lack of interaction on the more traditional learning management system platforms actually created pain for them. It also meant that they were not able to bring to their higher end clients the premium experience that they were really trying to provide. And so in our platform, we're able to create both a mobile-friendly version that did not require as much video creation, which reduced the total cost and resources required to bring a course to market, while also allowing for much greater interaction and many more modes of interaction between the delivery and the student or the learner themselves. And so from the client standpoint, from the customer standpoint, they were able to convey the full value of what they were doing, and therefore they were able to bring the whole selves and everything that they knew with this platform that augmented their greatest strengths, which is our selling point in the market. For our next framework, I want to talk about what we do once we've gotten to initial product market fit. It's generally inevitable that your initial area of PMF will have a relatively small, limited surface area when it comes to commercial opportunity. And that's what's represented on the lower left-hand side of this chart here. We have two axes. One is requirements difference, which is the difference between subsequent opportunities and where you have found initial product market fit, and distribution difference on the vertical axis, which is how much additional work or how much retooling we need to do in terms of distribution versus where we found initial product market fit. The size of the circles on this chart represents the relative size of the opportunity. And we can express that in different ways, whether it's gross profit, net profit, revenue, and so on. There's different ways to think about this. But conceptually, one mental model that we should have in mind is that each subsequent opportunity will require additional work for us to capture. It is usually not enough to stay with your initial product market fit if you're trying to create a sizable business. For each additional opportunity in the market, you will need a refined product market fit and also refined channel market fit. And so as you're evaluating each additional opportunity, what you want to do is make sure that you have a good grasp of the difference in the requirements of the customer faces, as well as what it will take to get to them, and then the overall payoff that you'll receive if you do successfully find product market fit and channel market fit again. One mistake I often find executives and founders make is that they conflate, or in other words, they mix up their initial product market fit with saying that, oh, it worked in one market, then it will work in the next one. In my experience, that has never been the case. And particularly as you're coming out to APAC, and even more specifically Southeast Asia, every market is humongously different, right? I mean, just within Southeast Asia. And so it's inevitable you will have differences in customer behavior and in what they need. And so as you're breaking it down and as you're assessing where you want your company to go, you should keep in mind, as you're trying to jump between bubbles, the overall return or the ROI you're going to get from each one. And you should carefully assess what is the difference in customer requirements and the difference in distribution, what it will ultimately get for you. You should not try to cover the entire canvas at the same time. Your teams will die and you will fail in the market. Don't do that. We just talked about the difference in customer requirements in the last framework. One thing that we talk very infrequently about in the ecosystem today is how you select different channels. And this can often become overwhelming for founders that are trying to enter a new market. Or you hire a marketing leader or something like that. They'll basically tell you whatever channels they're most familiar with are the right channels to use for a given situation. And it makes sense, right? Because they themselves trade on their playbook and their familiarity with a given function. They know how to run sales, they know how to run marketing. Anytime we're trying to get into a new segment or a new opportunity, we do need a refined channel market fit as well. And we need to make sure those channels are consistent with the experience of the product, as well as with the monetization model that we have. So there's no easy way to do this. There are also millions of potential channels that you could be using. And so it does become quite overwhelming and overly complex when we're trying to select from all the potential channels. But overall, I think a useful set of criteria, a useful framework that I keep in my mind whenever I'm entering a new market or trying to think about a new thing is to select channels based on 3 different qualities. The first is reach. How much of an audience and who are you going to reach with a given channel? The second is interaction quality. What is the quality of the information? What is going to be the level of interaction between the customer and you? What is the overall sorts of experience they're conveying as they interact with you as a company? Ultimately, to some extent, that channel, whether it's a human or a billboard or an advertisement on Twitter or whatever, is going to convey something about your company. It is going to represent your company and your product. And in a very real way, that channel is part of the overall solution that you're bringing to the customer. And you want to make sure that the type of interaction, type of experience the customer has when they're working with you through that channel is consistent with what you're trying to convey. And third, of course, is cost. How much are you paying to tap into this channel? How much are you getting out of that channel for what you're putting into it, particularly when it comes to the monetization and to the product as well. Okay, so we've come a long way on our journey so far. Now with this framework, we're getting down to the execution level, where we have to be very clear about what we're doing at each stage in a given market. We are aligning resources. The first one is explore. The first thing that we should do is make sure that our theoretical assessment of the opportunity is correct, that we have validated the demand, we validated the requirements of the customer in the market. The second is inevitably, as we're entering a new market, we will need to develop differentiated product capabilities, and this is what I'm referring to as build. Going back to the value proposition framework, if we have not built a thing that is different, if we have not built a solution that is actually going to be useful for the customer, they're not going to use it. There's no reason for them to switch to something new if it's not going to do anything for them. Once you've actually built out the solution, you can try to go to market with it and mine for revenue. And this is a repeated activity. It's one that you want to make sure is replicable and repeatable over time. This is what actually creates a scale. This is how you generate and capture demand in the market. And fourth, as you mine and as you start to find those revenue streams, you will see that there are opportunities for refinement. You'll receive customer feedback. Your teams will give you feedback on what could be sold or differently or what you could bring to market. And so you end up iterating on the product as well as your monetization approach. Again, where I see teams stumble is where they mix up all 4 of these different stages. Sometimes I've seen teams put an entire go-to-market team in market. You've got the head of sales and partnerships and marketing and customer success, even before you've even built the product. This is expensive and doesn't work. Conversely, I've also seen very product-focused founders just continue to build. And they just keep building and building and building without actually having explored beforehand, without actually having understood what customers want, and therefore sort of stumbling because they haven't brought anything useful to market. And so as you're going into a new market and as you're trying to scale, you have to be absolutely certain that you have taken each of these 4 steps. It's possible to stumble into an opportunity. There is always the role of potential serendipity in market expansion. But generally speaking, if you're trying to go about it in a coherent way and trying to maintain integrity, you want to make sure that you have accounted for all 4 of these stages. If there's anything that you take away from our conversation today, it is that go-to-market, market scaling is complicated. There's a lot of things going on, but it is achievable. And particularly as you break down your analysis and then your execution based on these frameworks, and as you count for each element, you're much more likely to be successful. I know that our discussion so far has been a little bit conceptual. It's been a bit more abstract and focused on the frameworks. I'm looking forward to discussing these examples, potential examples in greater detail, and how to implement these frameworks in the fireside chat later.
And thank you, Thomas, for joining us in the studio today. This is our next episode of Scaling in APAC. So we heard from you earlier, especially with this 6 Feet framework, that there are many elements that makes a great startup and a great scaling company, but you need to be very conversant in how they interact with each other. That's something we really learned a lot from you today. And we're going to probably dive a little bit deeper and getting a lot of real life examples from you so that we can put all these learnings into play.
Sounds good. It's a pleasure to be here.
And then before we do that, I have a lot of curious questions for you. I got to do a little bit of research about yourself and your life briefly. And you started your career in the US, but you were actually brought up and you've spent some of your growing years in Taiwan as well, right? How did that difference in these two countries, one in part of Asia and one in one of the fastest growing part of the world, the US, how did it shape your growing journey?
I mean, I think that's an episode by itself. I am the son of Taiwanese immigrants. So I was born when my father was finishing up grad school in the US. And we lived there, this is the simplified version, across various different states until I was about 11 when we moved back to Taiwan. And so moving back to Taiwan was a pivotal experience for me. Because I didn't really speak Mandarin all that well at the time. I could understand it, but I sounded like a bit of a robot when I spoke, and I was completely illiterate in Mandarin. And so I did find myself having to adapt. And I think from that point on, I sort of became a hybrid in a lot of ways, with some roots in American or Western thinking and attitudes, but with at least minimally an understanding of how things were done in Asia as well, and how society is organized and things like that. And when I look back, and when I look at myself today as well, I do see myself usually drawn to intersections of different things. It's never just one thing, but really looking at different elements fitting together in a bit of a system.
It doesn't drive you emotionally. That just doesn't make sense for you to put more time and heart into it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Over the course of my career and I guess my life, there have been situations where, at the end of the day, I'm a dutiful eldest son who grew up in a relatively traditional Chinese family, and a lot of it is about duty, right? You do what you're supposed to do, and I've frankly been pretty good at doing that. But what I have found is that the greatest motivation and therefore the greatest excellence comes when you do have that emotional resonance and you deeply do want to do something by your own right.
So I have gotten a really new perspective about you, because I always knew you from the perspective of a very successful person running and growing this fintech company. You wear your hat in a venture fund. I just heard that you mentor and you're running incubator programs and lots of these other things that you get yourself busy in. How do you manage your time?
First of all, it may or may not be true that I actually do everything well. That's a different issue. I think a lot of it is about picking the right battles. And of course, you need to find the right platform as well, right? I think a lot of my own journey has been figuring out where I actually have strength and where I therefore have leverage. And then trying to set up the opportunities in my overall life or my portfolio of activities in such a way that I can play towards those strengths. And the points of leverage that I do have are the ones that are valued by the people that I'm working with.
I would like to dive into some hard questions on some of the choices that you have had to make as you were navigating and you were in the thick of things, working in a few organizations which were really trying to grow and scale in this part of the world.
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, and because we are primarily targeted at supporting companies who might use Asia as the next growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. What is something, or what's one of the toughest learnings that you had when growing in APAC? Because in some of the organizations you work with, there seems to be already an initial product market fit.
Yes.
Right? How was that experience different? And what was the toughest learning?
What I have seen myself do well is take something that has been built, even if it's still kind of rough, and then figure out, okay, how do we bring this to market in a way that makes sense, and then how do we start to iterate on it? And the toughest learning, I would say, is, especially in tech, it's very possible to see a product that you're in love with. It's beautiful, it's well constructed, you can see the ideals behind it. But if it's not constructed in a strategic way to fit the needs of a market, and particularly if you neglect the channel and the monetization fits that we talked about before, you don't have a business, you just have a product. And that's something that I had to learn the tough way through my own experience. Some of the firms I've worked with did have a great product that I fell in love with, that I, as a user, wanted to see grow in the world. But without the other elements accounted for, it just couldn't take off, it couldn't scale. And so looking at it from that six fits perspective and taking a step back and looking at businesses as a system rather than just as a product or just as a thesis, I think became very important for me.
Yeah. What are some tough learnings that you had when you had product teams who were reluctant? Because HQ is based somewhere else,
yes,
and they're not there in the trenches with the product, with the sales team, with the marketing team. How do you manage that differences in opinions?
Man, sometimes even if the product team is based in region, you're still going to have differences of opinion. When we look at this framework, I think it's very useful to this part of the discussion, because what actually unlocks additional circles is usually not actually the go-to-market team. The go-to-market team can go out and figure out where the next circles are, and they can also figure out how big the circles are. They can figure out how saturated the circles are. What they cannot do is actually unlock the circle. Ultimately, with product teams, they have to take ownership of unlocking the next circle, especially in tech. And so what product teams need to realize and take ownership of is their responsibility for unlocking the next bubble, or the next circle in this case. And it's not easy, right? Because I think depending on the way you set up your organization, the orientation can be quite different. Product guys often do want to just craft what is a perfect product in their mind. There's an element of almost artisanal design and of technical excellence that the market, frankly, may or may not actually care about, depending on who you're selling to, right? And certainly I can tell you, having this sold to solopreneurs and freelancers and small businesses and startups, the average client does not care that much about technical excellence as long as the product works. So I think a lot of it is about getting on the same page about where the opportunity is. And I'll speak from the perspective of a go-to-market leader. What go-to-market teams can do is work harder to systematically and robustly delineate where the opportunities are, in effect to identify where the bubbles are and to define them, and to be very clear with the product team about requirements difference, about specifically what things need to be built in order to satisfy the needs of the market. And then the product team should be the one to figure out how to build the thing. The average product team, frankly, in this region is not set up to have an in-depth first principles understanding of clients. They just don't have enough data points depending on how they've set up their day and their processes. And that's where the two sets of teams need to come together to identify and to align on the opportunity.
Any specific examples to some unique challenges in this part of the world, especially for Southeast Asia?
In Southeast Asia, I think depending on the type of offering you're bringing to market, what you'll find is that relative to markets, say like the US, China, even Japan, each individual bubble representing an opportunity will be substantially smaller. You are much more likely to reach saturation faster. So again, without getting into any gory details, I've been in roles where we had very strong product market fit. We had a clear differentiator. We came to have a very clearly defined customer profile. And so we were very successful in going to market. But within about 9 months, we became saturated. And we had basically filled the entire bubble. Like the bubble was dark blue at that point because we had already hit every conceivable basically customer that fit the profile. And in order to unlock the next bubble, we would have to build separate things, right? So if you're in Southeast Asia, almost depending on which segment, you will probably find that the bubble just fills much more quickly relative to other markets, and you have to be on guard for that. That means that from a strategic standpoint, the complexity and the fragmentation of the market can actually be a moat because companies from outside the region or even within the region may struggle to grasp it. If you can do this well, you can win, you can build a lasting business. But that means that you need to be 2 steps ahead at any given point. If you're in the process of filling one bubble right now, the product team needs to be building for the next bubble or the next 2 bubbles. And strategically as a business, you need to be seeing 3 or 4 bubbles ahead.
That sounds really hard for a company wanting to scale in Asia, and Asia seems to be a huge population and a fast-growing population. Is it worth it? Is it worth scaling in APAC?
I think it depends on what you're doing because at a macro level, again, depending on the market, there are huge opportunities in Asia, right? I mean, and in certain industries, some markets are disproportionately big compared to the size of the population. In Singapore, for instance, which is the market where I live and probably know the best, you have a very large financial services industry in various forms. You have people, companies coming from all over the world to operate in Singapore and take services in Singapore from financial services. There's a whole professional services industry that has grown up around it, right? That is world-class and it has global reach. Logistics, shipping, things like that. Wholesale, import-export, right? And there's similar dynamics in Hong Kong, too. So just in these 2 markets, you have these pillars of certain industries that do represent compelling go-to-market opportunities. So I think, again, depending on what you're doing, and if you've selected the right opportunity, in other words, if you pick the right bubble, there you could have very compelling reasons to come to Asia. But you have to choose well.
Cool. And you have lots of success in the last couple of years with many of the organizations you work with, you consult with, or you mentor. Are there 1 or 2 examples you'd like to highlight and how they managed to grasp the unique opportunities in APAC and how they grew massively?
I would say a lot of it comes down to timing, actually. So I would say there have been 2 campaigns or really 2 growth drives that I've led where we had just excellent timing and targeting. The first one, back when I was at 500 Startups or 500 Global, I was essentially helping to scale a professional services team. We were selling startup programs, corporate innovation programs, which is something I still carry on to this day, obviously on a much lower scale. But we were able to go from the US, landing in Japan, Singapore, Korea, Malaysia, Taiwan, even Cambodia, and with more to come until we hit the pandemic, because we had grasped the opportunity. There was a huge wave of interest in startups among governments, those by corporates at the time, and we were able to move quite quickly because it was a services business and not a product business. We, as a frontline team or as a go-to-market team, we were actually able to retool the solution in a very customized way, depending on the needs of each client. And we were able to deliver on that successfully because we were not as beholden to a set of fixed infrastructure in the way that you might in a software firm or a fintech firm, for instance, right? And that was actually a huge factor in our success, is knowing that the clients required customization and taking that sort of tailoring mindset, which allowed us to scale something like 8x in my tenure over the course of about 3 years or so. But that was very successful, and we did quite well. With Aspire, where I've held a number of roles, we've been able to scale quickly because I think we hit on one significant pain point for a significant pool of customers in a given time frame. Aspire got off the ground really as a provider of digital banking solutions, although Aspire is technically not a bank, because we were able to find a pool of customers that faced enormous pain and enormous friction in account opening. And without going into details on who these people are, suffice to say that they were willing to try new things and they were willing to grasp at whatever solution came into the market as soon as it existed, right? And we were able to scale off of that. Similarly, back when we had a lot of growth capital in Southeast Asia, which has since been dialed back, but particularly in the 2022, 2023 timeframe, when there was more capital to be had, we were able to sort of ride that wave, and we had a product which hit pain points around complexity in financial management and in business operations that we were able to sell into, again, better than a lot of our competitors at the time. So I think a lot of it has been just finding that one wedge, what is a point of leverage, and really hitting that repeatedly in a good way. And even when you're under-resourced, even when you have fewer people, even when you might have less of a brand than your competitors, if you target that point of leverage well, if your value proposition is super sharp and you have found the right channel, that's when you really start to scale.
Right, and I really admire it. I've been an Aspire customer from, I think, at least 6 years back. It must have been when Aspire just started for a year or two, and that pain point was really bad.
Yeah. I actually joined Aspire partially because I had already validated the pain point because I myself had experienced it. Back when I was at 500 Startups, I tried to set up we were trying to set up a new entity and a new bank account in Singapore for a project we were running. And it took months to set up a bank account. So I knew already firsthand that if in fact we could do what we were purporting to do, we would have a business.
Cool. And just right, my next question is, as companies are growing, and how would you suggest that they look at their team structures and operational focus at different stages, right? Because as they are growing and especially they're getting into a new piece of the market, how would you operationally see how this evolves?
This is a topic that's close to my heart. That comes from my consulting roots, where I did deal with a lot of organizational issues, and I found that even large corporations often are pretty bad at figuring out organization. But the way I think about it is your organization should follow what your strategy is, because your organization will also feed back into your strategy. And the most important thing you should have is clarity on what you're trying to achieve, which is sort of why I made up this framework to help guide the founders that are having to make these decisions, because otherwise you kind of get lost. And for each of these different stages, exploring, building, mining, and refining, this serves as a different strategic objective. You're really trying to do different things with it. You're trying to achieve different things in market, right? So each of these strategic objectives requires a different set of activities, and therefore a different set of competencies at the talent level. And therefore, in order to make sure you have those capabilities set up in the right way and interacting the right way, you need to have a different team structure at different parts, right? And so I would say you do need to optimize your team structure based on what you're trying to achieve here. For example, when you're exploring, frankly, I don't even know if you need a team on the ground per se. You need to find a way to get insight, but you can get contractors, you can get consultants, you can do expert interviews through a expert network or something like that in order to get that initial validation. For building, I mean, this is a product iterator, right? It's like maximum you need like one sales guy or something to go and test the waters and go do customer interviews and make sure that you're working together with the product team and you have a lens on that. More important is to actually have a product team that is dedicated to actually building a thing that the market wants. With mining, this is where you can potentially scale, right? And today there's a lot of buzz around you don't actually need teams anymore. AI is gonna make everything go away. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I'm taking a bit of an agnostic view to how big teams actually need to be. I still think it really depends on the customer and what channels they prefer and how they want to interact with you. But with mining, this is really where you're trying to get scalable and replicable, right? So this is where you actually do start stacking multiple people, multiple teams, even multiple layers in order to manage that organization, right? In order to make sure that everything is coordinated. But the guys that are good at mining are often not going to be the guys that are good at refining either, right? The average head of sales, the average regional sales director or whatever, is not going to be able to have a very strategic view on the product or on your pricing model. They'll be able to tell you what is and is not selling, but the average person, and again, this is not saying that salespeople are dumb or anything, having been a sales leader myself, but you do want to make sure you have people with the strategic lens who can work well with product and work well with the pricing teams or whatever to figure out what is the optimal model, right? And so, and it's possible that even at some point that you dial back on your previously large go-to-market team to do the refining. It really depends on what part of the life cycle you're in as a business and what you're trying to achieve.
Right, I had lots of fun speaking with you today. I learned a few key points from you and how you had the heart to do something you love. Thank you for sharing so many good points about scaling and growing in this part of APAC and the amount of opportunities that lies, but also a lot of the pitfalls that you have shared today. And having different team structures at different stages of growth and how to look out for some opportunities in that way as well. And my favorite part of our session is your thoughts on branding and products and when to spend money on each of them. So I've lots of fun with you today. So thank you, Thomas, for joining us in this episode of Scaling in APAC. So my last question for you in this session is, what is a question or what is an answer you would want to give a version to the next startup or scale-up founder that you wanted to give yourself 20 years ago?
What I would say to myself 20 years ago is the most important thing is probably to understand yourself better and really know what your strengths are and to take joy, to revel in your strengths, to lean into them, and instead of focusing on your weaknesses. And instead of trying to compensate for your weaknesses all the time, really figure out where your zone of genius is, so to speak. If I'm talking to myself, I would say it might take you some time to find your zone of genius, but find your way there, and that's really where you'll thrive.
So thank you, Thomas, for joining us in this episode of Scaling in APAC. We really enjoy learning so many things about you personally as well as your professional perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I enjoyed my session with Thomas. Wow, that was fantastic. That guy is great. He's not only an educator, he's just so much wisdom and real practical inputs. Mm-hmm. And if you cannot remember anything that you've absolutely said today so far, the final takeaway from Thomas should be that one single thing that you should learn for startup founders and people who are scaling out there and you're relatively young, right? Figuring out what you're strong in, right? Figure out your zone of genius,
yes,
right? And complement yourself and surround yourself with people who are good at the things that you're not good at.
I know where he gets this from. The Great CEO Within. I know exactly what he's referencing. Fantastic book. Yeah, just basically as an entrepreneur, work within your zone of genius, the area where you're the strongest in, and delegate everything else out. I know where he's referencing it, but sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so that point is absolutely brilliant. And if I have to reflect, because that was when I was asking him if that's one advice that you give someone yourself 20 years ago, what would that be? And that's something I totally resonate with so much, because for a long time we've all been in a space where we're not good enough, what if I'm just an imposter? But sometimes figuring out what you're really good at just makes that difference, and it just uplifts your whole energy. And that's something that non-entrepreneurs will not tell you about, right? People have been there. It's not about the technical skills sometimes. It's about everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bona fide moron in 99% of things in life. But as our good friend Liam Neeson says, I've got a particular set of skills. So it's acknowledging whether you're a founder, whether you're an executive leader, what are the areas that you're the strongest in? Like, what are the areas where you just do better than anybody else with the highest competence, the stuff that you really, really enjoy? There's areas which you're good at but can be delegated. There's areas that you're terrible at. There's areas that, I forgot what the fourth one is, but I completely agree and understand with the zone of genius part. So it was quite interesting actually having a reference in this particular context.
Yeah, and he shared a lot about this 6 Feet framework, right? The connection between market, product, monetization, and distribution channels. I think from an educational point of view and a practical point of view, this gives a very easy to understand. It seems easy because Thomas have said it, but actually in real practical sense, it isn't that easy to implement and to figure out, which is why he offers coaching program to help you sort that kind of stuff out as well. Right. So I think this is super useful for most of you out there, and we'll make these episodes available for you to refresh your thinking on it. But beyond that, I resonate another part of what he said about the wedge, right? And this part about not being the best in your industry, you don't have a strong brand, but if you are able to understand the pain that you're solving for, you're able to solve that better than someone else, you're able to have a very specific understanding, explaining what you're strong in, you can succeed well as well. So have you had a particular time where, as a smaller business back then, you weren't really outstanding, but you solved a small pain point and that allowed you to grow massively from there? Was there a point in your company?
To be honest, I think there's been multiple points, and this is something that I strongly agree with. First of all, it's one of the things that with companies that we work with, I explain to them. Like I get asked a very unusual question whenever I deliver talks, and that is, we're launching a product in stealth mode. I'm like, get out of stealth mode. They're like, oh, but what if people come and copy our idea? I'm like, if someone tries to copy an idea that makes no money, they're probably a moron. And then they're like, okay, we're looking at targeting these 10 different markets. I'm like, no, you target one market, you niche down. You basically, the riches are in the niches. I think actually Thomas is the one that quoted that for me, but I strongly agree. You niche down on solving a very, very, very defined pain point and doing it better than anybody else. Because even if you're competing against other companies on a more broader scale, if you can be the best at solving a particular pain point in a particular niche, it gives you the impetus to then be able to grow that out and to be able to scale that out. So it's something which, in the example of my company, I think for us it's probably the advisory board angle, where companies exist that build advisory boards, but I don't know any other companies that are building advisory boards for tech startups that are between seed stage to Series B. And that's a very, very particular niche, because the needs of a company in seed stage to Series B are so different if it's a company now Series C onwards. How do we raise? How do we find product market fit? How do we do our hiring? How do we open up new markets? We've got expectations from our investors to be able to intelligently deploy this capital and turn this 5 million valuation into a 25 million valuation. I've never done something like that before. How do we actually go about doing it? We've been able to see tremendous success and actually open up global markets off the back of just focusing on that one particular niche. So that for me is why I completely resonate. And actually, to give a shout out to a client of ours who I think really nailed this, We work with a company called Optable in Australia. For anyone who's familiar with Australia, they're from Adelaide, which is not the part that I would have typically associated with being the growth hub of Australia. They do like an artificial intelligence processing software for grants. Now, AI processing software exists, but they're specifically focusing on grants because the process of a grant application, whether a government bank, they need to go through like 100 different applications, but the criteria that they look at 90% of the time, it's exactly the same thing. So they're able to automate that and just give you, great, these are the 5 that really, really fit the criteria. Because they've just niched down on solving a very big pain point, government is super inefficient. Maybe not the Singapore government, they're actually quite good, but Australian government or like UK government, etc., etc. And by just drilling down on that, they've been able to open up and get traction in the US and multiple global markets. So I completely agree with what the bank engine is saying. And I think that a lot of startups can also learn from that you don't need to try and be everything to everyone. If you're a subject matter expert in a particular area, niche down and solve that one particular pain point better than anybody else, that is going to create the cascade effects to be able to do everything else.
Right, well said. And with the bank, the engine says that, and Colin says that, it must be absolutely true, right? And this other point that he mentioned about timing, right? Timing is everything. You need timing in your favor. If you have a brilliant product, you have a brilliant team, sometimes what you lack is the timing. And there are many factors that we all don't have control in. And he shared his 2 particular stories about how he leveraged the point in time when COVID hit and everything else seems to fall in place, and he multiplied multiple folds, right? So was there a particular time in your own career as well where timing worked in your favor or against you?
Well, I definitely multiplied during COVID as we had a baby. But in terms of, I guess, referring to specific market conditions, COVID was pretty horrendous for many, many businesses. One of my really good friends back in Australia, COVID was actually phenomenal for his business because it's an e-commerce store. And with everybody stuck at home, it just absolutely boomed. But then post-COVID, we really benefited from the timing factor there, where a lot of companies are like, right, we're coming out of this, we need to be able to ramp up, and we were basically printing money. So timing is absolutely everything. And you and I have also seen our friend Anshul Gupta and how that was able to significantly benefit Tab Square. I've got another friend from EO Melbourne where he sold his company, I think, for 30 million, and then COVID hit, and then he bought his company back for 3 million. It was one of the greatest deals that I've ever seen. That said, yes, certain market conditions and timing can act to your benefit or to your detriment. But I think one thing that remains constant is you just have to be consistent and put yourself out there. You can't rely on different market conditions. You have to rely on yourself and getting out there and hustle, and you create the right conditions. So I guess it's kind of a mix between nature and nurture.
Yeah, and sometimes if you just have bad timing, it means you're preparing yourself so that when the right market conditions picked up, you'll be ready for it, right? And one of the other areas that I want to just dive a little bit deeper alongside with you is team structure. And something that caught me by surprise on what Thomas shared is, especially if you are growing in an overseas market, don't hurry to hire. Right, leverage contractors, leverage partners, channel partners, so on and so forth, and get that initial results and figure out your team structure. You don't have to emulate the exact team structure you had in corporate HQ.
Oh man, I strongly agree.
Yeah, and what do you have a different team structure at different points in time, and yes. How does that work in your favor?
Yes, I strongly agree with what Thomas is saying here, and I've seen this happen routinely throughout. One of the parts of my business is recruitment, and I've come from a recruitment background. I've seen companies either make the mistake of just hiring too quickly. So coming in from America, looking to go into Asia Pacific, and they just go and hire their team of 20. But the problem is, you still don't have any sales. It's pretty logical. Or trying to replicate what's worked in one market to another market. There are certain things that you can replicate and it will work. Like one is called a pod structure, which is, it's like a team of 5. It'll have a marketing person, a salesperson, a pre-sales person, a channel person, someone who can be like lead gen, but typically like the core nexus that you need, and you can pop pods into multiple countries, but it doesn't always work. So where I strongly agree with Thomas is when you go into a region, the people that can go 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 are actually very different to the people that go 11 to 50 or the people that go 51 to 200. The mistake that I see companies make time and time and time again is they launch in a new market by hiring the person that can go 500 to 1,000. It's completely unsuited. It's a very different skill set, different level of hustle. It's not glorious work that you need to do at the start. I'm sorry, but it's not. It's like when I moved to Singapore, it's like an example. I'm active everywhere on social media. I'm trying to get as many partnerships because the reality is nobody knows who we are. So if I was to hire someone that already came from a very large and established company and then throwing them into that role, they're going to be fish out of water. It's just the people that can do the initial building blocks are very, very different to the people that can then take it to the next level. So that's where I fundamentally agree. And do it as lean and measured as possible. Go hire some contractors. Get partners first. My recommendation is get yourself 6 channel partners in a new market before you expand into that new market, which is very funny that we're talking to Thomas because Aspire was one of the first channel partners that I got. By announcing that we were partnering with Aspire, a whole bunch of people then knew who Scalar was. And the first week that I migrated to Singapore, we even hosted an event in the Aspire offices. So I actually leveraged exactly what he's talking about. Look, I can't agree more because this is literally what I speak about to pretty much every single company that I meet. I've seen how unicorns have grown doing this. I've seen how companies have burned and wasted so much money by doing the opposite. Get the traction first. Do not overcommit capital. Do it lean, do it measured, do it rational, and then you start accelerating and building it up.
Cool. And I seem to think we have some questions coming in. James is asking, how can we optimize our distribution channels to reach more customers? You've got some thoughts?
Oh man, there's so many different ways that I can answer this question. Okay, so the first one is, what actually are your distribution channels? So I'm going to act as if we're talking to a tech audience. Distribution channels, or more like what I call channels, there are different types of channel partners. There's technology and alliances, there's independent software vendors, there's resellers, there's affiliates, there's consultancies, etc., etc. There's something like 8 different types of channel partners. When you say optimize, I'm going to assume you mean how do we make more money using our channel partners. So the reality is every single partner is different, and you shouldn't assume that you know specifically what the needs are of those partners. And I'll give you an example. Something that I recommend when you're launching into a new market is don't bother talking to the large companies. Don't bother with Accenture, don't bother with Deloitte. I'm sorry to say they do not give a shit about you. The reality is the companies that are most interested in working with you are the other smaller stage, earlier stage startups. Why? You're both the same size. You have a customer base here, they've got a customer base here, you sell to the exact same customer base from a completely complementary angle. You add the most amount of value to one another. Promote them, they promote you. That's how you start driving deal flow. So that's when you're working directly with a founder. When you're working directly with someone who's in charge of partnerships or alliances, what you need to know is what is that person's motivation and KPIs. In the example before of a founder, their motivation and KPIs is they need to grow and run the business and generate revenues. In the example of a partnerships or alliances director, they're KPI'd on bringing on board new partners and driving revenue through those partners. So what they're motivated by is, number 1, you actually becoming a partner of theirs, and 2, how you're going to help them to do their job. If you can help them to do their job and show how you can drive leads or revenue through their company, they're going to reciprocate and do the exact same thing. Now, I want to be clear that using channel partners is it is the best way of scaling. I know that one of my friends is going to disagree with me. It's the best way of scaling. 80% of unicorns use a channel partner strategy. 80% of NASDAQ-listed companies use the exact same strategy. It's like making money when you sleep. But you've got to be prepared for it because you have to add value to them first. So if you want to optimize your distribution channels, this is what I would do. Identify the companies, same customer base, completely complementary angle, where they actually need you and they're motivated to work with you. And then go out of your way to add value to them. When you do that, they're going to add value back to you. Obviously, you want to create something like an incentivization structure. So if they go and sell it, they can make something very attractive. People usually gasp when I tell them this. Like I had a person that's like, if we get our channel partner to go sell this, they'll make 2%. I'm like, you're an idiot. Why would someone get out of bed for 2%? Like, nobody knows who the hell you are. They're taking a massive risk on you. You need to make it attractive so somebody does it. So what I noticed that a lot of super successful companies that like have done is at the start, 20% lifetime recurring revenue. Close a deal, you make 20% lifetime recurring revenue. Do you know what? That gets people out of bed. As we both know, Singapore is not cheap, so getting 20% ongoing perpetual revenue is a massive motivator. You have to make it actually attractive and motivating. If you come in with 2%, voila. So that's how I would optimize channels. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Essentially, understanding what is in it for them, make them succeed, and you will naturally succeed.
Yep, that's it. Literally, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Help others, help them to achieve their goals, and they'll return it back to you. If they don't, just don't work with them. But you kind of need to slay a few dragons to get to the princess. But that's kind of how you do it.
And before you get that, figure out your own entire business strategy to make sure you have that kind of margins to support that as well.
Yes.
So a great business plan is a great starting point.
Yes, yes. Also, don't forget, when you go into new markets, you can actually increase your margins. The amount that you would sell a solution for in Australia is actually usually a lot higher than what it would be in Indonesia. So just change your pricing model in line with the market. Next question is from Eleanor. So when entering a new market, how do I know if I've achieved a good product market fit? A couple of simple ways of answering it. To first of all, test and validate your product market fit. Get 6 channel partners, because that'll show you that there's people who are, there's companies who are selling to your target customer already, something complementary. That'll show to you that there is actually a PMF. After that, now that you know that there actually is a demand, the rest of it you kind of need to split test. You need to split test your messaging to the persona that you're targeting, and you need to be able to split test your pricing. You can't go into Philippines and sell something for what you would sell it in the US. It's just not going to work. So get channel partners, get 6, and now you know that people want to actually, that this customer base is getting serviced, and then test different messaging, test like 5 different ones, split test it, and split test different pricing, and you'll see what's resonating the best. That's kind of my shortcut. I know that it's not really scientific. It's just something that we've applied.
And my very simple theory is people must pay and must get actual revenue, right? People saying that it's too expensive, people saying that don't care about them. Just figure out your shit along the way, test, try,
Yeah.
and get real results, right?
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to pivot, because I've heard so many stories of how people have pivoted. Actually, the product is somewhat the same, the messaging is very different, and in the back-end office, it's the same thing they're doing. But from the messaging point of view, it just appears to solve a different pain point. So especially when you're going into a new market, don't be afraid to reimagine what your product could solve for a different pain point.
Can I just give you a perfect example? Most people have used Slack. Slack was originally a mobile game or a video game company. They got funded. It wasn't working. Their venture capitalists actually decided to back them, invest in them again. But they found that they created this internal tool for communications, which was very, very popular. They're like, okay, why don't we try out this? Slack was actually a mobile video game company. If they didn't pivot, they wouldn't have exited for billions of dollars to Salesforce. Some of the most richest companies on the planet are doing it. Like, you can learn a lot of lessons from that. So either way, thank you to everybody for tuning into our webinar. On our screen, you're going to see a poll come up. We would like if you can help us to make the next event even better by filling it up. If you're interested in what we shared today, be sure to follow our socials for more information on our upcoming episodes and when they're going to get released. And we're looking forward to seeing you for another exciting episode of Scaling in APAC in May. So thank you to everybody, and we shall see you in the next episode.
Okay, see you.